All right, fantastic. Well, I'm excited today to be here with Lisa Calhoun on the Decision Room podcast. Lisa is the founder and managing partner of Valor Ventures, the South's first woman-led institutional venture firm. Lisa is a Kauffman Fellow, a thought leader in AI and seed stage investing, and the driving force behind a VC portfolio shaping the future across industries. Welcome, Lisa.
It's great to be with you, Josh.
Yeah, fantastic. So maybe just as a starting point, you could share a bit about Valor and kind of the origin story of the firm.
Sure. Well, Valor Ventures is a seed lead venture capital firm, and that is a fairly rare breed. There are a lot of seed investors. There's still a lot of VCs, even though the market has shifted quite a bit in the last year and a half. Not so many firms have been successful raising a next fund as is typical. But a seed lead for a founder is particularly helpful because they actually write a term sheet to evaluation and sort of start the clock on creating value and creating generational wealth for the founder and their team. And so a lead investor generally helps the founder build their executive team out further and also works with them very closely on iterating market penetration motions so that it can scale rapidly. Generally brings together some of the syndicate at seed and helps them target the right next round investor. And so it's a pretty big role. It's a really fun role, and the origin of it is fairly straightforward. I've been in technology my entire life. I literally started in my parents' business working with computers in the 1980s. So come by very naturally, soldered plenty of RAM back in the day and things like that when you could build your own computer and they weren't so tiny. And so fast forward a little bit, I'm passionate about the South. I'm from the South, raised in the South. There are a lot of people who can invest in the South. It's a wealthy region, but there aren't a lot of seed lead investors. And so in my late 40s, I thought building a venture capital firm that would tackle the opportunity of the burgeoning entrepreneurship in the South and professionalize it, kind of bring it into the global venture community, that would be exciting. And that's been many years ago. We're investing out of our third fund, and it's really quite an exciting journey. We get to meet amazing founders all the time.
Yeah, cool. So, beyond just your description of what a seed lead does, could you maybe share a little bit more about what makes Valor different? And then, you said you meet a lot of amazing founders. So, maybe in particular, what kind of founders you're most excited to back?
Yeah, there are three things that really differentiate Valor. One is the geography. The South has 40% of the US population, but only three or four seed lead firms across all of that. I mean, you have well over 50 seed lead firms in Silicon Valley to give you a sense of that. The geography is very different, and we don't lead deals outside the 16 state census South. That's Texas, through Maryland and Virginia. We're based in Atlanta, Georgia. The second thing that really differentiates us is we have a team of operators. Our myself, I'm an operator, serial founder. A lot of our operating partners, like Jean-Luc Van Holst, exited his business before getting into venture. And we have a venture partner team of seasoned, been there, done that, had a great exit investors who can support founders on that journey, not just to an exit, but to a transformational exit. And that kind of knowledge built in the South for the South is really unique. And then the third way we're differentiated is our focus. You're right to ask, what do we invest in? We don't invest in everything. We invest in B2B enterprise. And so right now, that is all about AI. And we've been investing in AI since 2017. We invest a lot in SaaS models, but also, your typical AI pricing models. They're still being figured out. But essentially, the B2B enterprise go to market motion is something that we have literally hundreds of reps in with our team.
Got it. And so you mentioned AI, and it appears that as a firm, you've done something very interesting with AI yourselves in building some proprietary tools or a proprietary engine. I don't know exactly how you guys refer to it, but maybe you could describe that a bit for folks.
We refer to it as Vic, as in victory. So we have an agentic AI. It's a suite of agents on an MCP server. We started building it. It's going to be 2 years ago this fall. And essentially, it allows us to look back on our data set of thousands of startups in the South and compare and contrast that with data sets of startups that you can, find visible through things like PitchBook and CBI. And really learn what is moving well in the market. What does the competitive market look like? It also just supports our team in day to day. I mean, I am not ashamed to admit I hate doing data entry. Not alone. A lot of people do. And so one of the big reasons we built Vic was we wanted to let our team, seasoned experts, a lot of post-exit founders, not have to use their valuable time entering details on notes from meetings and new founders that they met. And so you can either talk to Vic on your phone, or you can shoot Vic an email, forward Vic an email. You can take a picture of a business card, but Vic does all the proper data entry. And it can, allow you to work with our Salesforce backend in a verbal format, like, hey, put this new deal opportunity forward into the diligence stage because I'm really excited. And it just automatically forwards things, and then the appropriate actions happen. From a founder point of view, I'm talking very much about in the weeds of how great it is for our team, which it is. But from a founder point of view, it allows the founder to get instant feedback on what Valor is likely to think of their deck. And that is something that, with a smaller team and thousands of founders in the South, we're not able to provide the kind of feedback instantaneously that we wish we could, right? But we want founders to have that opportunity to engage with us. And so we have two AIs fully pointed at founders. One, Vic, if you go to deckcheck.valor.vc, you can send it your deck. And, it takes a moment because it's a pretty complicated AI and it checks a lot of things for you. But within 5 or 10 minutes, you're going to get a detailed email back about traction and where you are. And it'll rate each piece of your deck on a 5 scale to give you an idea of how you can make your pitch stronger. Some of those things for a seed stage founder, an early stage founder, they can easily do, but no one's told them. And so to get that VC feedback quickly and professionally really helps them iterate. We also have one we call Rick, and Rick is for more the pre-seed or concept level founder. And it works through our sister organization, Startup Runaway, which is a 501c3 foundation. That foundation helps founders meet their first investor, and Rick coaches them through milestones on building out a business plan. And so it kind of, to put a bow on it, one more way that we really, work with Vic is a lot of founders complain, and you see this all over LinkedIn, about VCs ghosting them. Mm-hmm. We too have been guilty of not writing a founder back because we literally lost the email in the 100, 200 emails that got pointed at us in a day per team member by AI. So we could literally lose something in the stream. That's sad, but it's true. Not anymore. Thank goodness. Vic is able to go through any founder that's reached out to us and really write a nurture email that brings up the past and says, hey, Daniel, we met with you 6 weeks ago and you said right about now in our meeting, you'd be closing a big contract that you thought would kick off your feelings of time to raise. If, once you secured your first big enterprise deal, you were ready to raise. So could I set up a meeting for you with the team member you spoke with? Because if that happened, because you said it would now, we're on it. So we are much more confident about not missing an amazing founder that told us how great it was, and then we failed to follow up. And that's a real issue in VC altogether because of the deluge of deal flow that we have. So it's really helpful to have an AI, kind of making sure that we prioritize those founders.
And is there, obviously there's the sort of feedback to the founder, but then are there triggers on the back end that, if someone scores at the highest level, then it kind of goes in one pool, or if it sort of scores as interesting but not fully baked, it goes into another pool, and if it's not for us, it goes into a third pool, so to speak.
Well, if someone shared a deck with Vic and it's not for us, Vic could tell them that. It's very transparent. It doesn't give any false hope. We've told Vic is based on how our team actually talks to founders. So it's not like talking to ChatGPT, which always wants you to be happy. It
Yeah.
wants you to be happy. It's going to be professional, but it's also going to say, you're not in a space that Valor invests, just facts, things that you'd like to know, that you don't have to waste your time. So we really prioritize that the founder is building something important, and we don't want Valor we want Valor to be as transparent, engaging, and helpful as possible in every founder conversation, whether it's with a person or whether it's with our agent. So there's no bucketing that Vic does. That would mean Vic's making a decision. And thematically across Valor, as an AI investor, we don't let AI make decisions. We think that's a bad idea. We do let it prioritize things like if it scores above a certain level, and it's a pretty broad level, it will offer to set a meeting for you with one of our investors and take off that calendar burden of going back and forth. So it does forward deals. It can't kill a deal, and it can't put a founder in a side bucket. Likely, if it tells a founder, for example, we don't invest in B2C. One of the most frequent things Vic shares is somehow a founder was told to reach out to us because we're a great seed lead in the South, but they weren't told we don't do B2C. Our website says it, but you can miss that. And so Vic will say, hey, this is all good. This is all good. This is all good. We don't invest in this space, however. And so usually it's not that the Vic put them in a bucket. The founder themselves knows I'm not going to waste my time following up here.
So you've probably touched on, or at least alluded to, a couple of these points already, but just in general, when you think about AI's impact on capital formation and founder dynamics over the next few years, what excites you the most? What concerns you the most about what you're seeing?
What excites me the most is the opportunity to show up more human at all levels of business, not just at capital formation, because a lot of the tedious data entry, heavy lifts, um, repetitive motions and tasks can be handled and can be trained to AI. And so I think that while in the short term is disruptive and can be a bit scary, in the long term, we have the opportunity to be more human with each other and talk about more important things and get out of the business of hiring humans to do tasks that robots or agents could do, and allow them to fully express more of their gifts, more of their intelligence, more of the creativity, all those things. And I'm really excited by that. Um, concerns me, I guess what concerns me the most is fairly specific to our region. And, it is that there is not enough capital investing in the entrepreneurs and the great teams in the South. It is a big struggle. And yes, Valor and a few other great firms are trying to handle that. Collab Capital in Atlanta just raised a really nice Series C and Series A fund, for example. So there's hope, but truly, if people are interested in investing in great entrepreneurs, getting involved in venture capital in the South is the frontier and a really exciting place to be.
So I know an important part of pretty much every pitch deck, whether it's pre-seed or whether it's right through bigger deal private equity, is the team. And so how do you look at the team now, and how do you look at AI as potentially part of the team and the type of agents that you've been describing as part of the team?
Josh, that's a great way to put it. We do look at AI as part of the team. In fact, one of the frames that we advise entrepreneurs to adopt is to think of having agents in roles. It's a very easy frame. the technology is up to the task. If you can teach a person to do a relatively repetitive task, you can teach an AI to do it. And so rather than think, I need AI for all of this, just think, ooh, I want to hire a marketing coordinator. Could I hire an AI agent to do that? Maybe one is available in the market. There's things popping up every day. Maybe with a little thought, you and your CTO or developer or yourself could code it with something like Replit, or if you're more enterprise, something like Devon. And so we're definitely encouraging our founders to think of the roles that they need filled, write the detailed job description. This is just hiring 101, detailed job description, do the cost analysis of what it's supposed to benefit you and what the KPIs are. And then before you hire a human, consider what it takes to hire an AI or build.
And so when you evaluate founders or founding teams, how do you assess their sort of AI aptitude, or how has that changed now that there are these vibe coding, vibe marketing tools available, and that it is possible to potentially for one person to get an MVP out there, do all the work around
Oh yeah,
identifying the
that's
ICP,
very possible.
all these sort of things.
That's
Like,
that's almost
how
the
do you look at that
expectation.
now? Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost the expectation that one or two people can get to an MVP and to early revenue. And that's not so different than it was even 3 or 4 years ago. It's just faster with AI. I would say, to give you an example of how much faster, our we standardize some of the things we say to founders per quarter to make sure that we're all on the same page and founders don't get missed signals, something that they hate, understandably. And so, for example, this last quarter, our advice to CTOs within our portfolio has been whatever your product roadmap was, if you're properly AI optimized in your development stack, you can bring it forward and cut it in half. Not 75%. You probably cut it in half. And so we've been working with our founders. One of our AI developers on our team works with CTOs specifically on AI product road mapping, which is certainly a new skill and a developing skill. How you can pull agents into your QA process. How do you pull agents into rolling out special things that customers may need as you're developing? So does that help answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think it does. I co-founded a fintech startup in the 90s, and over a few rounds, we raised something, I don't know, close to $35 million, and probably half of that went into infrastructure. And
Yeah.
then obviously you had the cloud, and suddenly, where we had multiple redundant data centers, now you have a credit card and AWS or whatever you're using, right? And so
Yeah.
that suddenly means you can spend a lot more time working on your business and not so much the tech stack. And now you've got this whole other, evolution here. So, just trying to understand that from a capital efficiency point of view, and how many different scenarios do you test, and how do you choose kind of where to place your chips a little bit, because it's the technologies that are coming out, and the leverage they give you are just evolving so quickly.
That's so true. I think the thing that we talk a lot about at Valor is, what is your competitive advantage going to be? What do you feel that it is? And if the role you're hiring for, even if you're considering AI for that role, is within your competitive advantage shadow, then build it. Build it for yourself. That's one of the reasons why, although there are things available on the market, Valor is really committed to building our own AI, because our competitive advantage is making faster, better decisions. Our team will always do that. To do it, we need the best information. We're not going to put that in the hands of a suite of multiple products. That doesn't make a lot of competitive sense. VC is just as competitive as everything else, in some
Sure.
ways, maybe more. So we ask that of founders, and if it's not in the zone of their competitive advantage or the shadow immediately around it, then maybe they should look for best of breed, just like you would do 3 or 4 years ago. It's just that now AI has widened that aperture a little bit.
And so when you are looking at either your teams you've invested in or contemplating making an investment or just trying to share your knowledge with someone, is there a role or two critical roles in the C-suite that you think have to be a certain type of human being, or are there certain characteristics you think you need in your founders today? And I guess another question might be, is there a typical first hire outside the founding team or next hire outside the founding team that you're seeing is critical in today's environment with the way this technology is evolving?
It's technology doesn't change people. People create technology. And while our culture gets influenced by the technology we create, the spark is the people. It's us. And so I would say we haven't seen any change in the type of founders we want to back, and the type of core team they need, that hasn't changed either. How they work, the tool stack, that's changing, but that's also always been true. And so every 3 or 4 years, there's been something. AI is a massive change. Yes, it is. But at 53 years old, I'm old enough to remember the internet was a massive change too. And
Yeah.
still, some things remain the same. You need a visionary leader who is willing to disrupt the status quo. And for a venture backed company, it needs to be a big enough disruption in a big enough industry to make a dent in the world, a company that has a global scope. And then, so in other words, one of the ways we talk about that is a vision that is not incremental change, like 15, 20% better, but transformational change. It would rewrite the industry if this were true. It would change things by 500, 1,000%. It is an unimaginable change in the industry if this technology is true. So that's very much the domain of the CEO. The other very critical role, and that hasn't changed, is the CTO. Now, the skill set for a great CTO is always evolved. It evolves by quarters, and now it definitely includes AI competence. But a CTO that is hired and led teams and is now in the AI era is in great shape, because in our agentic world, you still need to coach and review AI. In fact, it may benefit a manager CTO even more than a pure 10x coder CTO, because of the way the technology is today. And then the third thing you need is sales leadership. You need someone who knows how to sell software in our world to enterprise. I know that's not true of every B2B enterprise. That is very true. The go-to-market motion of large-scale software sales, six-figure software sales, is a very specific background and skill set. And it's important to have that on the team as early as possible. If they don't have that on the team when we invest, and they usually do, that's the first hire we help them make.
To the extent that founders do misfire when building, their first team, or the next iteration of their team after they raise capital, where do you see that most commonly happening, and how do you guide them kind of back in the right direction?
Well, Josh, I don't think about founders misfiring very much, because I embrace the fact that they have to learn. I have to learn too, and hopefully we're all learning. And so if we're all learning, we're going to make mistakes. You're never perfect at the skill you're learning. And the founder, who is the CEO, is always in the biggest job they've ever had. And so they will, with the best of intentions, make the wrong hires. But even, is that a wrong hire if they are able to rapidly learn, redeploy, and continue to build their skill set in leadership? No, it's just a necessary part of the path. And so what we try to do is help our founders understand when to let someone go. And it's usually quite a bit faster than they would naturally think. So for example, in sales, we're big fans of letting people go in 30 days if they're not on track to perform in that situation. Because keep in mind, the proven performance we're looking for is someone who has sold enterprise software before. So they have the skill set. And two, they have contacts because they did it before. So if they're not on track at 30 days, they might not be able to get on track. And so let's refresh that talent and see what else we can learn about what's possible in the market. And there's so many other learnings along the way. Sometimes the right person is hired, but the company pivots and the team needs to be restructured even in the very early days. So rather than make that something to be concerned about or avoid, you try to keep those conversations front and center, transparent, and embrace the adventure.
And I'm curious because we work with a lot of growth companies, whether they're earlier stage VC funded or middle market private equity growth companies, et cetera. And oftentimes I've seen people get excited over talent that comes from big brand names and has Rolodexes and all these sorts of things. But our experience has been often basically people get hired on skills and experience, but they typically get fired on behaviors. So that's not to say that they're doing things that would get them fired for cause. It's, they're not the right cultural fit for the organization, or they can't kind of fit into what's required day to day in order to, fully bring that skills and experience into the organization effectively. And I'm just curious, do you have any observations, or there's certain, interviewing tricks you recommend to your teams to figure out, are people really going to work in a seed stage company with kind of the unique nuances of what that type of environment is like to operate in?
Yes, well, we often make sure that we're hiring people who have some startup sales success, and maybe that company was already acquired or exited. So we don't tend to hire from big enterprise and into startup, because people who are used to working in multi-level organizations, I mean, there are a lot of layoffs right now in marketing and sales roles in large enterprise companies because of the automation that AI is offering those companies. And so I would say there's more than the usual amount of talent, but talent that is used to being managed in enterprise scale is not usually comfortable with the build it mentality of the startup. And so we have an entire how to hire your first sales leader guide, which I'm happy to send you for a show note. It really goes into some detail on the types of questions that are best to ask. And they're very much, to your point, Josh, behavior based. So questions like, tell us about how you found your last big deal. Brag about it. Tell us about it. And if it was spoon fed to them, that's something. If it, it's that tells you something right away. And then how did you get it through the process to close? Well, if they really don't know because they were only part of a piece of the sales, that tells you something. And then following up with details like, how did you get this into the CRM? Maybe they didn't put it in the CRM. That tells you something. What is your favorite CRM? What is your favorite gotta have marketing and sales tool? What do you rely on? How do you nurture? What tools do you like to use? And if they don't know or don't use tools, then they're not a good fit for a startup. But a lot of times we've targeted really well, and we have several great candidates who are able to talk about, I built this out, I did this, I use this, I'm so excited about this. I know how to do this. And this runs like wildfire. And I built my own AI agent that does this. Like, okay, this person has I'm gonna get her done mindset and is not afraid of technology. That tends to be the right type of person to get into a startup.
Yeah, 100%. It's one thing to execute somebody else's playbook. It's another thing to have to build it from scratch.
Yes, you have to be so confident in sales, especially, but also in operations and some of the other roles, so confident in your expertise that it's not really a big lift for you to kind of build it from the ground because you're just an expert at that.
Yeah. So I know we're kind of coming up on time here. I guess my last question is, what does the next chapter of Valor look like? And, for you personally, what legacy do you hope to build, both as an investor, but then as a founder yourself, and then some of the other things you're involved with?
It's a big vision, but when I started Valor, and I still feel this way, and it's going to take time, and it does take time. The best seed lead firm in the past was Sequoia, and it may still be. I'm not trying to cast any shade on Sequoia. Since then, a lot of other large firms have entered the market and are doing a great job in Silicon Valley of leading seed. But what I told myself is I want Valor to be like the Sequoia of the South. And what I meant by that is the venture capital firm that if you're building in B2B, you want to pitch Valor because we might say yes. And even if we say no, it was such a valuable conversation that helps shape your go forward motion. We're in the early days of building that, but we're well on the way. That that is my vision, and I have an incredible team around it. And so just continuing to build toward that. And this is, it's Rome wasn't built in a day, and a great seed lead firm, it takes time, reps, and lots of referrals.
Yeah, great. Well, Lisa, thanks very much for your time today. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I would suggest if anyone was interested in Valor to go to our website, which is really simple. It's valor.vc, and consider joining us for an event. We do a lot of virtual events. Consider reading some of the blog about what's going on in VC in the South. And if we can be helpful, let us know.
All right, great. Well, Lisa Calhoun, founder of Valor VC, thanks so much for joining us on the Decision Room.
It was a pleasure, Josh. Take care.
All right, you take care too. Thanks.